So we've seen that for Schopenhauer, his whole philosophy can be summed up in two phrases. Life sucks and it's not worth it. In our last segment, we showed how life is not just full of pain, but the very significance, the very meaning of life as striving is pain, is suffering. Remember, Boethius told us no pain, no gain. That pain is the necessary prerequisite for a really meaningful and virtuous life that leads to an eternity of happiness. But Schopenhauer has shown us that there is no God, there is no future for us, and so therefore there's all the pain, but none of the gain. And so this is the topic of our second segment, to show that not only is life full of pain, but there's nothing to be gained from it. He calls this the vanity of existence. Vanity is a great word because when something is in vain, it's something that seems as if it's going to be worth it, but on closer examination, on closer thought, we realize it's empty of any real significance or worth. So when we use the word doing something in vain, we mean two things by it, and so did Schopenhauer. We mean that what we did was worthless, and we also mean that even if it is worth something, that our activity, what we did, could never achieve it, and therefore it was a wasted effort. So when he's going to argue that life is vanity, that existence itself is vanity, he's going to argue from these two perspectives. He's going to show that life itself, because of the very structure of our existence in time and the nature of our consciousness is constantly striving toward the future and away from the past, that objectively speaking and subjectively speaking, it's worthless. And then he's going to show that this very same idea shows us that all our efforts at anything are in vain, are wasted efforts. So let's start with talking about what it is to be valuable. We don't have to define value here. We could say there is an objective value. We don't know how to define it, but we do know one thing about value. Things that don't exist have no value, or another way to put it is anything that's empty of any reality at all, it turns out to be worthless because it's a nothing, and nothings are worth nothing. Obvious, right? So now we got to show you that existence itself is empty of existence. So remember, everything takes place in time, and that's where we live. We live in time. We live toward the future, maybe in the present, and we used to live in the past. But we can't live in any of these places. We can't live in the future, can we? Though most of us do. Most of us, because we are constantly striving toward goals that we are aiming for consciously, we live in the future, don't we? The problem is you can't live where there's a no place. And the future doesn't exist, does it? It doesn't exist yet. So the song that Annie used to sing in the musical Annie, tomorrow, the sun will come out tomorrow. Tomorrow is what? Is always a day away. It can't be today, because if it were today, it's not tomorrow anymore. And so when you live in the future, you live for tomorrow, you live for something that can never exist because it's always a day away. And so most of us are living for something in something that will never exist. And so we're fantasizing about an absolute nothing, nothing that will ever take place. And you might say, yes, but maybe it will take place. Well, if it does, where will it take place? Not in the future. It will take place, if at all, in the present. So we'll get to the present presently. You can't not only are there people who live in the future, but you also have people who live in the past. You know them. Usually they're older. These are the people who talk about the good old days, the times when they were young and they could really lift a lot of weight, the time when, in their glory days, when they were so successful in building their business or making a lot of money. And now those days are gone, aren't they? And so the past no longer exists. You can't live in the past because the past doesn't exist. And what you're remembering no longer exists. And what you're remembering, the present memory, is not accurate. It always is through rose-colored glasses, through nostalgia. And so what you're remembering is not accurate, and what actually took place no longer exists. You can't keep the past. It will go and eventually be forgotten. And even when it's not forgotten, it's not accurately remembered. And so you can't live in a nothing because it no longer exists. The past is gone. Every moment that you exist, that moment passes. And so therefore, every moment you exist is a moment that you're dying. So thus, to live in the past is to live in death. It's to live in something that is no longer alive. And you can't do that. So you can't live in the future because it doesn't exist yet. You can't live in the past because it no longer exists. And we already agreed, our basic premise is that a nothing is worth nothing. And so thus the future is worth nothing. The past is worth equally nothing. So perhaps we can take the advice that we've heard in that famous movie, Seize the Day, right? The Dead Poets Society. Seize the day, carpe diem. That seems to be the wisest course, Schopenhauer thinks. That we can't live in the past or the future, so let's live in the present. But now let's think about the present. How long does it last? It doesn't last very long. You know that. It's the present, and then immediately it's gone, isn't it? Immediately it's the past. So can the present last any time at all? It can't. Imagine it did. Let's give it a length of time, okay? There we go. Let's say a millisecond or a second. If it lasts a length of time, then half of that time will have gone by at some point that you're living there, right? Then that would mean that the present has a past part. But if the present has a past part, then it's not the present anymore. The past and the present are two different things. If there's a past in the present, that's a contradiction. And it would mean that part of the present hasn't occurred yet, which means that the past also has a future part, which means that none of these are really the present. The present is the now, the exact now, the momentary now, the knife edge now, the knife edge that has zero edge. And so therefore, in order to be the present, it can't last any time at all. Because if it lasted any time at all, it would have both a past and a future, and therefore wouldn't be the present. So it follows that the present moment lasts no time at all, and therefore isn't even possibly experienced. We know this. Advertisers knew this a long time ago when movies were invented. Now, I'm not talking about videos. Here's the important thing. I'm talking about movies. Movies are still pictures that are going by very fast on a rail so that it looks like things are moving, but they really aren't. They're just a bunch of still pictures going. And what they discovered, advertisers, is that you could put a single picture of a Coke bottle in a movie that every other picture is the walking of a person, for example. And because it only lasts a certain amount of time, so little amount of time that your conscious self doesn't pick it up, then that Coke bottle will appear to you, but you won't see it. It won't even be in your experience because it lasted too short of a time. And so since the present lasts zero time, it follows you can't experience the present at all. That what you think is the present is really your memory of the past and your expectation of the future. And so it follows that you can't even appreciate the present. It goes too fast. You are forced by the very nature of time to continue hurtling toward the future and away from every momentary present that dies before you even pick it up. So it follows that our whole experience is of an illusion, isn't it? the illusion of a present that is always our mind projecting a future and remembering a past. Even when you look at your significant other, it's too late. What you see is light traveling from her milliseconds ago. You never see her or him as she really is at the present moment. So the present is worthless because it has zero time and therefore has zero existence. What lasts zero time has zero existence, doesn't it? Which means, therefore, that it has zero value. Nothing is worth nothing. And so we've proven that because of the nature of time and because there is no God, there is no transcendent goal to aim for, there's no worthwhile existence, and since all existence is in time, existence itself is empty of value. But that's objective value. There are plenty of things that I value that I know are worthless on the market, you might say. I have, for example, a stuffed rabbit that I received when I was a little boy from my grandmother, whose name is Butchie. The thing is completely torn up, a purple rabbit. It's obviously, if I tried to sell it in a garage sale, they'd just throw it out. It even smells. It's raggedy, smelly, faded, and yet I value it. And so there are many things which have subjective value, which maybe have no objective value. So maybe life is just the value that I give it, right? The subjective value that I give it. That I wouldn't give Butchie up for the world. No matter money you give me, would I give it up? Because it reminds me of my grandmother, with whom I was very close. So now, his next task is to show that that's foolishness too. That life itself is empty and can't be valued by you, and you know it if you think about it. When you value something like happiness, you value it for itself. If I were to gain happiness, I wouldn't want something more. I would be satisfied with just gaining happiness, right? But what did we just prove? We proved that happiness is not possible. And so you can't enjoy life. Life is suffering. So that can't be the subjective value you get out of life. You always find out too late that you didn't enjoy it and that it was worthless in that way. So what about just being alive? If existence had intrinsic value to it, then what would that mean? That would mean that you would be satisfied with just being alive. You're just sitting there and being alive. But you know that's not true, don't you? You know that actually existence is something that if you were just sitting there and doing nothing, then it would be worthless. How do you know? You're not satisfied with just sitting there. Wait in a supermarket line. And in that supermarket line, you will be what? Bored, impatient. Boredom is the feeling of worthlessness, isn't it? It's not just the feeling of not having fun. When you're bored, you have nothing to do. And that's how we often equate boredom. Something that you have nothing to do. And what does that mean? That means that boredom itself is your subjective feeling that the present moment of doing nothing is worthless. So, existence has no objective value, and the fact that we get bored so easily with doing nothing shows that we're never satisfied with just existing. We have to add to it some kind of goal. It has to be for something. So when we come to our next segment, we got to show that whatever we're aiming for, that striving that is the inherent characteristic of existence, is impossible. That we will never get what we want. And so therefore, it's a wasted effort. That will be our next segment.